Okay.
Well, should I get going? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
good?
yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes,
I just
go
need
for
Yeah.
to.
it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. Today, I guess the main topic is local music and why it is both important and why music recommendations should think of local music as a really important sort of domain. And just to get started, oops, let me see here. I'm currently in Ithaca, about 5 hours southwest of Montreal, and I was just saying I would have loved to have driven up there. It's one of my favorite places to visit, and I've been up there a few times, mainly to visit Chiro at McGill, but it's been a little while since that's happened. Um, so uh, why is local music important? Um, well, of course, music is a great form of entertainment, right? We all love to go to shows and dance. It can be thought provoking. It has emotional impact. But we're going to start by enumerating all of the ways in which music is local music in particular, and having a vibrant local music scene can really have lots of benefits that we might not have thought about. So first of all, there's a lot of personal benefits, right? There's physical benefits just by dancing and moving. We burn calories, we strengthen muscles. There's a lot of mental benefits like stress reduction and creative inspiration. And there's a lot of social benefits like meeting with old friends that can be really reinvigorating to connect with old friends and meet lots of new people, right? That's a part of being a social creature. In addition to the individual benefits, there's lots of community benefits. So there's things like building, music is a great way to bring people together, particularly from a diverse set of backgrounds, right? We really embrace lots of different music traditions, which is a great way to learn about other cultures. And conversely, it allows us to kind of define regional identity, right? We know that there's certain regions that have certain music identities, maybe in down in Asheville in the there's like a good bluegrass tradition, or out in Seattle there might be a grunge tradition, or out in Hawaii there might be Hawaiian music, ukulele kind of music, and so there's like places that have identity around music. And finally, this is the sort of most important thing for me, is that if there are opportunities if there's great local music scenes, it gives young people a chance to like develop their talent. So here's a little picture. My son is there on the far right. He was playing at like a club with a bunch of other adults for this PTA elementary school thing. And he got to like get up on stage and rock out on his little Stratocaster, and it was totally fun. And then he wanted to come home and practice and get better. And that leads to the next generation of musicians, right? Finally, I think the most obvious benefit to having a strong local music scene is the economic benefits, or at least these are what most Chamber of Commerce or local governments are interested in. They want to invest in the arts. And so clearly there's direct revenue from ticket sales and from merch, right? There's all these jobs that are created, not just the musicians, but the bartenders, the security guards, the event organizers. And music can bring in a lot of tourism too, right? There's people come from around from the region to enjoy the bars and the restaurants. They stay at hotels. And then there's a lot of knock-on effects that we might not necessarily always think about, but if there's a good music scene, there's people who need music lessons. So there's music educators, there's record studios to record music, there's music retailers who sell instruments and other music equipment. So there's a lot of benefits to the local community. Here's a plot of the impact of the music ecosystem on different communities. This was from a Huntsville, Alabama study. And something like 57,000 people are employed in New York that are directly involved in the music industry. And that's about 1.4% of the population, the working population. Other cities like Austin, Texas, and Asheville have almost, over 2.5% of their population is involved in music. So it's a small percentage, but it's a pretty large, area, and supporting this kind of area can really help enhance a community So, so, and I think the other thing that's always been a little surprising to me is that local music should be a movement, right? We have other movements like the farm to fork movement, the locavore movement, where people want to shop, find their produce and meat from the local area. It has good economic and environmental benefits. And so here's a picture of our farmers market here in Ithaca, where every Saturday, Sunday, and Thursday it's just packed with people buying local food. There's also sort of a small business movement, particularly around the holidays. We want to support independent stores. And this is the downtown commons here in Ithaca, where there's lots of local retail stores as well as restaurants. And it's an open sort of commons area where people meet. And there's also a lot of live music and a lot of busking as well. So the benefit is that if you spend $100 in your town and you go to local independent stores, immediately $68 out of that 100 gets recycled back into your community. If you go to a big box store like Walmart or Target or Best Buy or Home Depot, only 14 of those dollars get recycled into your community. And if you go to a big online retailer like Amazon, only $1 gets recycled back to your community. So just as an economic multiplier, it's really important to support small and local businesses and small and local farms. And similarly, we should be supporting small venues, like local music stores and that kind of thing. So I should also mention we did a study for the Izmir conference last year, where we just looked at where we collected thousands. I forget the exact number, but tens or hundreds of thousands of live music events during 2019, sort of before COVID hit. And we just looked at, we correlated the number of live music events per capita in 1,139 cities across the United States. And we just correlated that with other socioeconomic indicators. And what we found was that, this is correlation, not causation, obviously, but cities that had a lot of live music per capita tended to have good public transportation. They tended to have steady and healthy population growth. They had positive economic indicators. They tended to be on the younger side, like post 18 and pre 30 years old. They tended to be a higher level of education. So there's benefits to having lots of shows in a community. Well, I shouldn't say well, they're correlated with. So if you have a live music scene, it's more likely you'd expect there to be other positive socioeconomic indicators for your community. So, so the question is like, why is this largely ignored as a topic or area of research within recommender systems within music recommendation? So just to before I dig into that, the traditional way we discover music is we have a friend, and that friend might know a lot about the local music scene. So he or she will tell you all about the great shows that are happening this weekend. Or we might turn towards the local newspaper, although these are increasingly disappearing. And there's online equivalents. And what you see is just like a list of artists with maybe a genre tag, maybe a venue location. And it's not really that, it's a bunch of artist names that you've never seen before, you might not recognize, and genre labels can be coarse and kind of vague. So like these systems aren't really, they're enumerating all of the possible shows, but they're not really giving you insight into whether you should go and attend and support these local artists. But so, and a lot of music recommendation has now shifted into the streaming domain, and if you go to the major streaming sites like Apple Music or Amazon Music or Spotify, they don't really surface local music. They do sometimes show you a concert for one of your favorite artists. They tend to be the larger concerts at the stadiums or the large venues, but they're not really doing anything about, there's no notion of like local artists, or sometimes individuals will create like a playlist for a city, but it's not a systematic or sort of supported process for discovering artists from your own community. So And this is a problem, right? And this is related to the long tail recommendation problem, right? So if we just were to rank all the artists from left to right in terms of my band, my dad rock band on the far left, which has 0 listeners, and then Taylor Swift, who has, you know, billions of streams. And then we were just to look at the number of streams for each of those artists, we see this typical long tail kind of distribution of stream counts. And recommender systems we know are very good at recommending artists in the short head, the sort of most popular 1,000 or 10,000 artists. But in the millions or tens of millions of artists, most of the long tail artists that we're going to talk about who play in your community don't have that kind of market share in the streaming area. So these local artists are what we would consider long tail artists. And if we just the numbers are crazy, right? If you look at how unbalanced or how much this is a rich get richer marketplace, 90% of the streams go to the top 1% of artists. There's a great graph here from this Rolling Stones article where there's a surprising result, which is that this is that same kind of plot, the long tail plot. But what's surprising, and the red line here is if every artist was randomly shuffled and every artist was perfectly exposed to every user, which again, music is a meritocracy. We do like the music we like, so that shouldn't be the case. I'm not arguing for that. But what was really fascinating is that even with physical album sales, there was more diversity in terms of the number of artists that were being listened to, but it's actually gotten tighter. It's more consolidated in terms of the top percentage of artists that are getting listened to in streaming music. So that tells us that it's even harder now in the age of streaming for local artists to be discovered and to be supported. And the main takeaway here is that just having access to music on streaming services doesn't mean that they're being users or listeners are being fairly exposed to that music. And the economics of this is really interesting. One of my favorite authors is Liz Pelly, and she wrote about the secret lives of playlists. And she really kind of talked about how before streaming music, there was this notion of payola, right? And so it was illegal for record companies to pay commercial DJs on radio to play songs. Now, of course, there were side channels where they give them DJs free tickets, maybe illicit drugs, other perks, but it was actually illegal to pay them straight to play music. There's no such law for streaming platforms. And we know that a percentage of, I think it's about 7% of Spotify is owned by the 4 major record labels. So there was sort of an incentive for those record labels to say to Spotify, why don't you play our music more since we're part owners in this venture, right? So there's nothing to prevent this sort of record industry and recommendation environment from working together to sort of crowd out these long tail local artists, right? So if they're working together, it's kind of it's a big barrier to entry for local artists who are not signed to one of these major record labels to sort of be listened to and discovered. And I should just say that this is not something that's hidden. This is the Daily Mix is the sort of flagship music recommendation product for Spotify. And if you go and you click on the little 3 dots here, you can learn about the recommendations. And I mean, they just explicitly state that in some cases, commercial considerations may influence our recommendations, right? And so they're not shy about admitting that commercial considerations have a role in their recommendations, right? So and just one more sort of statistic. This is a great academic paper and blog post by Luis Aguilar. He called Platform Power and Platform Bias. And what he did is he calculated the value of getting yourself played on, getting one of your songs featured on the Today's Hits playlist on Spotify. So just in your mind for just 1 second, think about how much money you think it's worth to have one of your songs be featured on this playlist. And the calculation that he did was that he found that if you got your song on this today's top hits playlist, it accounted for an additional 19.4 million streams over what it would have been had you not been featured on this playlist. And given that you get paid about $4 per thousand stream, that turns out to be about $77,000. So there's a pretty big incentive if you can pay $10,000 to like get your song featured on that playlist, you still stand to earn quite a lot of money, right? So it's a competitive landscape to get your songs on these high value playlists, these often Spotify curated, or another playlist by a company like Topsify, which is owned by a record label. And the goal for them is to sort of maintain a monopoly over the access to music through these playlists, right? And there's a large monetary incentive for doing that. So the result is that local music gets crowded out, right? There's sort of no way to actively discover local music. And even if like you're a great band, it's an uphill battle given all of these market forces. And so crowding out has this problem where we are creatures of familiarity, and there's something called the mere exposure effect, where often the first time we hear a song, we only kind of like it, but then as we listen to it a few more times, we really start to like it, and eventually after a lot of repetitions, we really love it. This is why when we listen to music, like in the background at a restaurant or a gym or whatever, eventually that sort of pop song works its way into your head and you start to really appreciate that music, right? So if we're never being exposed to these really talented local artists, we're unlikely to really appreciate them, even if we do hear them in passing. So my research for the last, say, 12 years or so has been about how can we develop technologies, music recommendation technologies, to help local music. And I thought I'd just quickly kind of talk through a few of the apps that we've been building, and some of the sort of the experience we've had building these apps. I'm going to talk about 3 apps. The first is called porchfest.live. And porchfest.live, does Montreal have a Porch Fest? Does anyone know? I don't know. We could look it up. I could pull it up. But Porch Fest, the idea is that sort of amateur and professional musicians all sign up to play music on a porch or a front yard or in a driveway on like a lazy Sunday afternoon. And then people sort of walk around, the listeners walk around and kind of check out all these bands. And sometimes it's a famous musician playing like a solo acoustic set. Sometimes it's like a dad rock band like my band. Sometimes it's a bunch of kids. Sometimes it's like a bunch of people doing a cappella. It can be really anything, but it really gives this great platform to anybody to find their own stage and play music. So this is the Ithaca Porch Fest. There are 186 bands that played each in 5 1-hour blocks. And this is like a mile radius. So you can see just how much music there is. And there's about 5,000 to 7,000 people, fans, just wandering around. There's no money. There's no like tickets. There's some food trucks, and there's a little bit of community sponsorship, but really there's like no money being exchanged. And it's a great way for particularly, again, young kids to have an opportunity to play on a stage before they might move to like a small venue or whatever. And it's just great to see all your neighbors playing music, right? To see how talented your community is. So I think there's on the order of 150 Porch Fests, mainly in North America, Canada, and Australia. And they're all over, and there's just so many cool towns, and anybody can do it. It's free. I've been loosely affiliated. It actually started in Ithaca in 2008 and has spread, and now there's Porch Fest in so many places, and it's free. It's easy to organize, and I just love it as a sort of idea. Here's the map of all the different Porch Fests. I guess it's hard to tell if I could send you a link, but it looks like there's some up in Montreal area. There's actually one right on the Montreal dot. So if you haven't been to Porch Fest Montreal, figure it out. I'm sure it exists. So we basically built an app, And you can imagine it's just sort of an interactive map of where each performance is happening at each time. But we also did a couple other features where if the user opts into letting us track your movements during that 6-hour period, what you can do is you can then see after how long you spent at each of those porches watching these artists. And we can generate a Spotify playlist, personalized playlist based on how long you spent at each artist. So if you spent like, half an hour there, we might put 2 songs. And if you spent 15 minutes there, we might put in 1 song. And the idea is that you're sort of supposed to have this serendipitous walk through your community, and the music that speaks to you, you sort of gravitate towards. And then the problem with that is that like the day after, you forget all the bands that you saw. So this helps you automatically remember all these artists. The other thing we did in terms of trying to be respectful of the art is to blur the screen whenever, sorry, there's a typo there, whenever you're within 25 meters of a live performance. So the only thing the screen shows you is the name of the band, so that you're not sort of facing the screen when you should be enjoying the music. So, here you can, there's your typical search and filter, and then there's your sort of map. But I think the features that are most interesting are sort of the tracking and the blurring. So this was a student project, and actually we launched it at a Porch Fest, and it worked. We learned a lot from the experience, and we're sort of in the process of redeveloping this app. And then the goal is to make it open source and share it with all these 150 Porch Fests around the world. So that's sort of a fun project that's really student driven, and I'm excited to see how that project moves forward. Another project I worked on a few years ago, and with a large number of students, was called Meg's Radio. This was sort of developed in 2010 to 2015. It was a personalized internet radio, a lot like Pandora. And again, we really leaned into both the design of local food. So we sort of used that aesthetic. And the idea was that you could put in a favorite artist, and then it would stream music, and it would interstitch songs by your favorite artist, as well as other similar artists to your favorite artist, as well as local artists that had a similar sound. We also created customized playlists for different cities and different contexts, for some music festivals and that kind of thing. So you'd put in like your favorite artist, and then you'd see so this was a personalized radio where you'd put in a music festival actually, and then every few songs it would play songs by local artists or artists that were playing at that festival, and you could learn about those artists by clicking on them and seeing an artist detail page. So, do you have a question, Rebecca?
Yeah, I do. I have a question. My question is more about so for both of these, how were the recommendations selected? So in the previous app, let's say you kind of have the roster of all the artists. Do you do some sort of lookup from Spotify? Do you randomly select their songs?
Yeah, so so for Porch Fest, there's not much of a recommender system per se. It's really just a filter by genre kind of thing. And actually the whole point of the Porch Fest app is to engage with the playlist after the festival. So based on you are the recommender system by you physically walking around the space, and by seeing how long you spend at each porch, essentially it dictates the playlist that we then generate for you, right? So it's like you're your own recommender system. It's a very humanist approach to recommendation. This one we used basically a matrix factorization algorithm. I'll actually talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the project that followed from this one. But you just embed, you just use in this case, an artist similarity matrix, and then the user puts in a favorite artist, and then we basically find similar artists, and then we also collect. You can see that there's the thumbs up and thumbs down for your explicit feedback. And you build a user profile over time, and they kind of steer the playlist using their preference information. So it's a pretty standard, matrix factorization type algorithm. And there's actually some really interesting implementation details, because we, unlike a lot of big music streaming sites, don't have a lot of user data to start with. So we bootstrap by using artist similarity data. And then as we get more user data, we start a switch, we transfer over to a more user by artist matrix. And then we use your typical matrix factorization, the weighted relevance matrix factorization specific algorithm. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second when I talk about our new project. But you know, it's pretty vanilla kind of recommender algorithms kind of stuff. So the next thing, the other part of this interface is that we do recommend artists and in local shows, and we have sort of a map-based interface, and you can filter by zooming in and out and by picking certain dates and that kind of stuff. But this, we made a nice mobile app. My students took it on the road. We went to music festivals and tried to promote it. And we had a few, like, you know, a few hundred or a few thousand users kind of use it. But it after about 5 or 6 years of development, we just noticed it wasn't really gaining any traction. And so we sort of did a post-mortem on it. And we found that really it was very hard to compete with the music streaming giants. We also took forever to sort of deploy this. We started developing this when Pandora existed, but Spotify hadn't crossed the pond yet. And by the time we sort of got it to a point where we liked it, the personalized internet radio model was basically dead. And so people wanted on-demand access to music using celestial jukebox like, you know, Apple Music and Spotify. But it's really also very hard to maintain a professional grade service with undergraduate students. And in particular, we had amassed a data about 100,000 songs in our music corpus, but growing it was very slow and linear. We would rip CDs. We would, and we could operate with a internet radio license, which is similar to we actually did licensing and streaming, but just sourcing new music was very hard, right? And 100,000 songs means that specific radios kind of got redundant because we didn't have the variety and diversity that a commercial system had. So this project was really ambitious, and it made we did well, but we couldn't really maintain it in an academic setting. So we switched over to a new project a couple of years ago in 2018 called Localify. And Localify is a little different. We wanted to not compete with the music streaming services. So what we did is we sort of, if you can't beat them, join them. So you can log in to this. This is the first version of Localify. You can log in with by, you know, connecting it to your Spotify account. And then basically we download we ask to have your heavy rotation artists. Those are the artists you listen to most frequently in the last period of time, maybe the last 6 months. Then you pick a city. Here, I'll just pick Ithaca, or actually let's pick Richmond, Virginia, which is down south a little bit. And so let's say I'm visiting Richmond for the week and I want to check out some of the local music scene there. What I do is I'd have my user profile here is all of my heavy rotation artists on Spotify. These are sometimes sort of mainstream, but they could be, I guess, relatively obscure if you listen to obscure music. But you pick your how far you're willing to drive to go see a show, or how far you're interested in finding about local artists. You can also, so this is my heavy rotation artists. You can, this is just onboarding. You can add or remove artists based on these are your heavy rotation artists. And then we basically present a list of search results or recommendations. We give you a percent match. We highlight upcoming shows at smaller local venues. And the more important thing we do is let's say I love this band Lord Huron, or I love Queen, and I don't really know this band Bird Talker. We're contextualizing this local artist by giving you what we call landmark artist to be able to sort of connect what you're already familiar with sort of a more maybe obscure long tail artist, right? So we're going beyond the newspaper I mentioned earlier, where now this is a personalized recommendation that's contextualized by a familiar artist. And so that's how we kind of, and then we have the percent match to sort of show you how strongly we're making this recommendation. So, you know, you can play song samples. You can click on the artist and learn about the artist. You can check out their, you know, their upcoming local events as well as any other events they have. You can find out about other similar artists that are similar to artists that you like. You can even well, and so you can also find out about like local venues by kind of clicking around and surfing a bit, and you can see all the other shows that they have coming up, right? So it's sort of like a music event recommendation thing. Here's another band called Space Koi. This, so I should have said earlier, the Bird Talker is not a local band. They just have an event at a local upcoming small venue. Space Koi is local to Richmond. And we, you know, have a little local banner to say that this is a band. They actually don't have a show, but they're similar to a band that I like. This band, John Brown's Body, is a reggae band that I really like. And Space Koi is similar to them, so maybe I should go check out Space Koi, right? And you can see that they're local to Richmond. You can actually add, we do some crowdsourcing here where you can add, if you have a favorite band, you can search for them and you can add and you can add information about where they're local to. And then, you know, you can also check out like all the local bands for a given city, right? So it's sort of you know, informational website that lets you learn about artists, local artists, venues, cities. You can see like the top local artists or the top local venues or that kind of stuff, right? It's just a good way to sort of learn about a music scene pretty quickly. The last sort of two features are that we also generate a personalized playlist for you for that city. So I'm visiting Richmond next week for a week, and I might want to just in the background passively listen to these artists. And what it'll do is it'll generate this personalized playlist that alternates between your seed artist, your sort of heavy rotation artist, and then the local artist that we're recommending, and then your favorite artist, and then another local artist we're recommending, and so on and so forth. And the idea here is that if you were just to play only local music, this would be a difficult playlist for anybody to listen to because all the music would be new and unfamiliar. It would induce fatigue. But by interstitching a favorite song and then a local song, it's sort of like the little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? So like and we're also showing you that these local artists or these artists playing at these small venues are really talented, right? They're amazingly talented, and they sound almost as good as the artists that you're familiar with, the mainstream artists maybe, but they have a lot of value. And if you just expose yourself to them, you might find something really great, and then you can go see them for like $10 at the small local venue, right? And so that's the hope here, is that by passively or sort of suggesting and contextualizing these local artists, you really have the ability to sort of learn to appreciate the artists in your community. Finally, we just have a little email digest that goes out every Wednesday that tells you about upcoming shows this weekend and newly posted shows at the various cities that you've kind of subscribed to. So there's lots of ways between playlists and personalized email digests to sort of learn about local music if you're interested. So the current state of Localify is that we launched it in 2018 and it had a sort of prototype version up working, and it worked really well actually, and it gained some traction. We had over 1,000 users, but then I had a new batch of, then COVID hit, and it really, local music was basically all canceled. Every show was basically wiped out for a year and change, and so we went back to redevelop it from scratch. We had one or two false starts, and now I have a great team working on a new version. We actually do have a version in the App Store for iOS, and we have a mobile app coming, a web app coming too. But we're kind of in the rebuild stage where we're really trying to develop a professional grade version where we have a lot of web scraping to collect data about music. And I didn't really talk about, I'll talk about the recommendation algorithm here in a second, but like where we have much faster, it's much more responsive, it's a much more commercial grade version. So we're sort of in this limbo where we have the second version coming out very soon. It's actually out technically, but it's not fully featured right now, sort of like a minimum viable product. And we're using it for some early stage testing, but we hope to have out this winter a full version of the mobile app and a couple other features. And again, it's a student project mainly built with undergrads. I have a team of about 5 or 6 undergrads working on it, and we make a lot of progress during the summer, but during the semester it gets hard. So it's a cool project, but again, I think the limitations of working in an academic environment can be overwhelming at times. So, and I'll just mention that we do a lot of related research, and I think what maybe this community is most interested in is things like fairness and bias. And in particular, we look at we use these systems, particularly the Localify system, to explore popularity bias. We had a paper at ACM Rexis this year on the different forms of popularity bias. So when we say popularity bias, we tend to think of like this sort of a nebulous term, which means, but we sort of looked at the literature and found 3 different versions of this kind of term. So the first being popularity related degradation. And this is the idea that recommendation algorithms tend to work better for more popular items. And that's closely related to the second bias, which is that popular items tend to have a lot more information about them, right? We have collected a lot more user feedback about popular items. And that's maybe why we see a decrease in performance for those popular items. And then there's sort of a third, less closely related popularity bias, which is called popularity lift. And this is the idea that if you look at the average popularity of the artist in like a user profile, they might be different than the average popularity of the recommended items, right? And so if we see an increase in the amount of popularity of the outputs given the inputs, that would be a popularity lift. And a lot of people have studied that for movie recommendation and music recommendation. And we've done some work where we kind of evaluated commercial streaming services and actually didn't find much popularity lift in the top 3 music services. And we have a paper about that. But the thing I'm most interested in right now is this popularity related degradation, the first bias. And so we had a paper at ACM Rexis this year. And so we're interested in exploring music recommendation algorithms. This is, a plot of 2 popular recommendation algorithms. The first one is the Who, Korn, and Bell paper, which is the standard like implicit data recommender system. It's a matrix factorization algorithm. The red is a variational autoencoder, multinomial VAE, which is a very popular autoencoder, sort of deep learning based. It's not really deep; it's like a shallow learning based model. But these 2 are sort of 2 standard algorithms. But what we did is that we basically looked, and without getting into all the details of the paper, we basically looked at how well it recommended artists that had different popularity according to Spotify. So Spotify for every artist has a popularity score between 0 and 100. And we basically just looked at how accurate it was at recommending different kinds of artists. So for example, we only restricted our recommendations to be between say 0 and 4. So these are actually the vast majority of artists. And what we saw is this popularity related degradation where the algorithm tends to work better for more popular artists. And in particular, how this impacts us is that we are really interested in recommending low popularity artists. So whereas in the high popularity range, certain algorithms might kind of, in this case, both algorithms kind of performed about the same, but in the low popularity range, the variational autoencoder algorithm worked a lot better than the traditional matrix factorization algorithm. So for us, we would prefer, the multi-VAE, just the multi-VAE algorithm over the sort of matrix factorization. So, without getting into the real details of the experimental design, these are the kinds of research questions that we're sort of interested in looking at. So, and there's a lot of other related research, right? Aside from popularity bias, one of the other areas we're really interested in is that commercial services have a lot of log data from past users, and they use that to do offline learning algorithms. And there's just not a lot of offline, there's not a lot of logged recommender system sort of feedback in the public domain. And so by developing music recommendation sites and then, obfuscating and sharing that data, we can help academic researchers study these same kind of things. And as I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of musicology. We look at sort of the relationship of local music and local music scenes, and how that can impact the community. And finally, we're really interested in developing these apps and using like best practices for humane technology design practice to make sure that we're using these recommender systems for community benefit, as opposed to sort of extracting things from the community for the benefit of commercial interests. So these are all the kinds of things that we're working on, and I think that's all I wanted to mention. I'd be happy to get into some of the details of any of this stuff if anyone's interested, or if you have thoughts for a small group. So I'm happy to hear what you guys think.